This is the Mox Team Zirconia podcast, episode 20, Setting the Tempo of Standard with Kriz. Welcome to Mox Team Zirconia. I'm Colin.
And I'm Graham, and we are your hosts. We are a podcast about Magic the Gathering for everyone.
And we want to inspire you to try out your own brews or to pick up an untested deck like one of ours, try it out, and then change it to suit your needs.
That's right. And remember, our immediate goal is always and will always be to make the next deck better than the last one.
We don't claim to be professional brewers, and we are definitely still learning how to make good decks, but we want to bring you with us as we get better and better, and hopefully you will too.
And a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at MoxZirconia and let us know what you think of the podcast.
Don't forget, we need your help to spread the word about this podcast, so please tell your Magic playing, homebrewing friends, and please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review if you can.
And word has been spreading, so thank you very much, and welcome to all the new listeners that joined us in January.
And a reminder to our new and returning listeners, our episodes are all up on YouTube, so please subscribe there because we have big plans for more videos in the future. So please subscribe, and you can search Mox Zirconia on YouTube to find them. All right, great. With all the formalities out of the way, I just want to say thank you for being here, and we have a great show for you today. Actually, joining us a little bit later on the podcast is a special guest that I am very excited about, so I can't wait for you to meet them. But in the meantime, we brewed up a deck last week, and we should talk about how it did.
Sure. Okay, so basically the whole point of the deck was to spit out a bunch of really cheap and inexpensive artifacts at the beginning of the game so that we could ramp into our big bad improvised creatures by turn 3, 4, 5, that sort of thing. So we did this in a couple of different ways. So we played 4 servo exhibitions, which everybody knows. We played a couple of vehicles. We played 4 consulate dreadnoughts. We played 2 cultivators caravans. We used Cogworkers puzzle knots. We used some renegade maps that also allowed us a little bit of land fixing. We played 4 bone saws, which is very rare to play in standard because usually it's a pretty garbage card. And we ramped those into a couple of improvised creatures. On a side, we had a couple of cool synergy type cards that we ran in the deck. We ran siege modifications so that we could turn our really badass vehicles into creatures at a whim, which is pretty freaking super. Another really cool card that we ran was called SRAM, Senior Edificer. He's the new white legendary creature from Aether Revolt, and he says that you get to draw a card every time you cast an aura, an equipment, or a vehicle spell, which we had plenty.
Yeah, it feels like we were drawing cards off of SRAM consistently, and sometimes even 2 or 3 in a turn.
Yeah, and that being said, I actually did drop the number of SRAMs in the deck. I had 3 to begin with, and I dropped it to 2 because I found myself getting more SRAMs than I wanted early game. He's really nice to have, but he's not really key to the deck. He's just kind of an auxiliary part of the deck, and so I dropped him down, and he was still fantastically useful.
So you ran 2 instead of 3?
I ended up running 2. I made a number of changes. I balanced things out. I found that I preferred having the Enraged Giant over the Free Jam Regent, which I eventually ended up dropping down to 1, just because he doesn't have the haste and the Enraged Giant does. And I did add in, like I said, 3 of the Sweatworks Sprawlers. One of the things that I found was that it was really easy to get to 5, including improvise artifacts, by turn 3, but it was really difficult to get to 6. So the Sweatworks Brawlers kind of improved my curve. It was a lot easier to get a Sweatworks Brawler out on turn 2 than it was to get an Enraged Giant or Free Jam Regent out on turn 3. So in that sense, I preferred having the Sweatworks Brawlers. I really liked the haste ability of the Enraged Giant. That was a really nasty combination. The Enraged Giant paired really nicely with servos in order to crew the Consulate Dreadnought, which was a really cool combination as well, because it's never a bad thing to have a 7/11 creature running around.
Yeah, so that's an interesting way, and one of the reasons why I actually think that maybe we should talk about the number of Free Jam Regents that we end up with if we do another round of it, is because even though the Free Jam Regent doesn't have haste, you can immediately tap him to help crew the Express. So you're still getting a lot of power out of it, because he is a 4/4.
No doubt. I mean, there are plenty of routes you can go with this deck. This deck is ripe for tuning. It is by no means a finished product, even after several rounds that we played, I think that I ended up ultimately playing somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 best of 3 rounds.
Okay.
And there's still plenty of opportunity for playing around with it, swapping things in and out. Yeah, this deck has a lot of potential. I'm curious whether more Thraben Inspectors might be useful, just because their combination with Bonesaw does allow a turn 2 Sweatworks Brawler very nicely, as well as providing a first turn blocker, which is also useful. That being said, the Sweatworks Brawler is also a potential pilot for the Cultivator's Caravan, all on its own.
Right.
Or 2 of them can pilot a Consulate Dreadnought by themselves.
Right, but actually I almost feel like if you have 2 of them, depending on what their board looks like, you might just want to attack, because both of them have Menace. You're likely to get more damage through, especially because
absolutely,
the Dreadnought doesn't have Trample by itself.
Absolutely, and surprisingly, Bonesaw is a great addition to a Sweatworks Brawler, because Menace, that extra damage, really comes in handy. Or I typically found myself getting multiple Bonesaws out per game.
So how'd you do?
All in all, I was pretty pleased with the way the deck ran. There were, of course, variance issues. Welcome to Magic the Gathering, everybody. But for the most part, I felt pretty good about the way it played. It was fun to play. It's really satisfying to swing with a 10-11 creature on turn 3. When you get that Siege Modification, Consulate Dreadnought combination, it's just the sheer look of screw you, man, in your opponent's eyes. It just makes it all worth it. Ultimately, we ended up going 2-2 against our gauntlet, I believe. We played against 4 decks that were top 8 in the Pro Tour. We played against the Mardu Vehicles deck, and unsurprisingly, we got destroyed in 2, and it wasn't even close.
So one thing that we realized pretty quickly is that the decks that don't have to play all these small dirty artifacts to enable improvise quickly and can just play good value creatures like the Mardu Vehicles decks tend to play, they will always just be a little bit ahead of this deck, because even though getting an Enraged Giant down on turn 3 or 4 is great, usually they have enough blockers at that point, or they have vehicles ready that are ready to crew and block, that you don't get the kind of advantage you do over some of the other decks that might take another couple turns to sort of get into swing.
Right. The sheer number of 3-power creatures that cost less than 2 mana in that deck are astronomical and damn near impossible to stop.
Okay, so who'd you face in round 2?
Round 2, we played against the Green-Black Delirium, and it was pretty simple. We won in 2. Siege Modification on a Dreadnought on turn 3. My opponent was a little mana-starved. It was too much to come back from. Game 2, I was able to get a Giant on turn 4 with on account of 2 Servo Exhibitions. It was a pretty long game, but eventually was able to swing through with enough damage.
So I feel like that's actually a pretty good matchup for this deck. It did pretty well, and then it was able to outvalue a lot of things, even though it was playing some 4 or 5 flying Mind Rack Demons, was still able to get through. So how about round 3?
Round 3, we played against Jund Energy Aggro, which was a very cool and very interesting matchup. I ended up winning in 3. Game 1 was won on the Siege Modification Consulate Dreadnought combo on turn 3, which is still just so difficult to survive that. Ended up losing Game 2 to a Heart of Kirin combo. Oh my god, I hate that card so much. Not only is it a great attacker, it's also a great blocker. It shuts down so many decks.
Vigilance, man.
Wow.
Ugh, I know.
Game 3, I was able to drop a Siege Modification on a Cultivator's Caravan and then play 2 back-to-back Enraged Giants to win that one. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that was like turn 5 or something. It wasn't even very long. You just like pounded it down.
Yeah, it seemed like a slow start that ended up kind of accelerating rather quickly. Got out of control.
Cool. So now here's the matchup that everybody wants to hear about, because we played against a 4-color Saheeli combo deck.
We sure did.
And what were your impressions about playing against that deck, about how it worked and how our deck worked against it?
I felt like I had a fighting chance, and I felt like I just got really unlucky. We ended up losing in 3, and I sideboarded in 4 shocks for the deck to nuke the Saheeli before the combo could fire off. Lost game 1. even though I got improvised creatures pretty early, they were able to double and chump block to stay alive, and they got their Marvel into play and got
oh yeah,
out.
because we should mention that this deck is one that utilizes energy to use Aetherworks Marvel to try to get through their deck and just find the pieces and drop them into play instead of getting Ulamogs and that kind of thing. They're trying to get the pieces of the combo with their Marvel and energy.
Right, and so I thought I had them because I was able to see that they had a Nissa in their, or excuse me, I was able to see that they had a Saheeli in their hand because they fetched it with an Oath of Nissa, so they had to reveal it when they selected it. And so I was like, cool, I'm just going to sit here with one red mana open and shock it when they drop it, because they already had a Felidar Guardian on the board. They had two, in fact. Silly me, they cast an Elder Deep Fiend and tapped my only remaining mountain so that they could go infinite without me being able to do anything, which was kind of a jerk move.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, though.
So, yeah. A lot of annoying decks in Standard meta right now. A lot of annoying combo. I guess not a lot of annoying decks as much as a lot of really annoying combos. The Gideon Heart of Kirin combo is obnoxious. The Saheeli Felidar Guardian combo is less obnoxious because it's more gimmicky, but it's still obnoxious.
So how do you feel about this deck competitively? Do you feel like you're always behind? Do you feel like you're always waiting for things? Do you feel like you were right where you wanted to be? Like how did it feel when you were playing it out?
It felt a little inconsistent in the sense that there were times where I drew tons of artifacts and no creatures that could take advantage of it, and there are times that I drew tons of improvised creatures and no artifacts to fuel it, which is probably the better scenario because in that case I will eventually be able to just hard cast those creatures. Mm-hmm. But it's a little silly sometimes to just be dropping. There was one game where I had 3 Consulate Dreadnoughts and 3 Bonesaws on board before I had any other regular creatures. Oh, except for SRAM. That was pretty cool because I got a SRAM out and then I played all of these Consulate Dreadnoughts and Bonesaws, but I kept just drawing Consulate Dreadnoughts and Bonesaws, which was kind of frustrating.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, thanks for the report. Once again, everybody, that deck list is up on tappedout.net, and you can search for Mox Team Zirconia to find it. And we would love to know what your experiences are with it if you want to try it out. I think that will do it, so we will move on. Okay, great. Well, thanks for that recap, Graham. I think that deck has some legs and it's going to be super fun. But now that we've gone over that, I cannot wait to introduce you guys to our guest this week. So please, I would like to give a huge welcome to Kriz from the Girlfriend Bracket and also their blog, Thoughts from the Back Tables. Thank you very much for being here and welcome to Mox Team Zirconia, Kriz.
Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I am a huge fan of the Girlfriend Bracket. I'm just going to say it out front right now. I think it is an incredibly important and wonderful podcast in the community. And ever since I started listening to it, which was probably about a year ago, I think, I was like, yeah, I want to brew with Kriz. Let's do this. Because for a couple of reasons, actually. One is and we're going to talk about your style here, but I think that your brewing style and the decks that you like to play are completely different from me, which is really great because I want to make sure that on our podcast we are covering lots of different angles and directions in deck building, and so I don't want us to get stuck into sort of the rut of the decks we like to play. So I'm really excited to step outside of my comfort zone a little bit when brewing and have a nice challenging brew for today. So would you consider yourself as a player or a brewer a Johnny, a Timmy, or a Spike?
I would definitely be a Johnny with some Timmy and Spike tendencies on occasion. I do like to play my own decks, but when it comes to, especially with Modern, I want to be competitive. So there is that little bit of a Spike edge that's like, well, I really want to do well at this tournament, so I'd rather bring something more established and maybe leave the brew for F&M or for other tournaments. So it kind of depends on what I'm going for. But at the heart, I'm a Johnny.
So you like to win is what you're saying.
Oh, I love to win, but there's also something to be learned from losing, which is actually why I started my blog that I called Thoughts from the Back Tables, because I spent so much time there initially into my competitive quote-unquote Magic career. And there's a lot to be learned back there. Some people say, oh, that's like the 04 bracket, what's to be learned there? And it's like, there's a lot, people are very creative. You get to learn about their different play styles. Maybe they had a wacky brew that they brought and it just didn't work for that particular tournament, but maybe in a different setting, it would be like amazing. And a lot of people that play competitive Magic, they either started as brewers or they do their own thing and it works for them. Jeff Hoogland is very well known for being a brewer and his brews work. So I can't hate on brewing. It's what I love to do.
Interesting. So it's not flying, it's falling with style.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. We've done a lot of that on this podcast, and we think it's great too, and really appreciate that perspective, because we can, when we build a deck that fails, we can come back and we can talk about all the ways that we, did it wrong, essentially. And I think we've done a pretty good job of not repeating too many mistakes. And so I'm really glad that you're here. So,
well, it's not just that, though. It's also finding the silver linings in the decks that don't do as well. So, okay, the deck didn't win, but, this one mechanic performed fantastically or way exceeded our expectations, and kind of picking out those little nuggets of knowledge to use in later decks.
And that's important to always have something that you can learn from it. Instead of being like, oh, it was terrible, it didn't work. It's like, well, maybe some things worked. Maybe it needs a different shell. Maybe you just have to tweak it. Or maybe it's just that idea is dead. It was fun, but it just didn't work out as you would have hoped.
Totally. So you play a lot of Modern.
I do.
Modern is very intimidating to me. I am always impressed by everybody who knows all these cards and interactions. And I'm just curious, as a format, like what really drives you to play that format over, say, Standard, or what draws you specifically to Modern?
I was originally a very heavy Standard player before I got into Modern, and I too was intimidated. I was like, this seems very complicated, and some of these cards are older, and I really don't know where to start. And once I started playing Modern, I originally started with an Esper Gifts deck, which made my friend Paul very happy because Gifts is like his ride or die. He's had very many Gifts shells, and so it was an interesting place to start because you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing in Magic, or that's just different. You're bringing things back from the graveyard and basically telling people all your creatures are going to die, or you can't cast spells of this color with Iona. So it has a couple different things you're trying to do with it. And so I got to learn, okay, the graveyard is super, super important in Modern, at least from what I've seen, and that there's all kinds of different things that you can do. And the cards do have a higher power level. Obviously, as you move on to Legacy or even Vintage, the power level definitely scales and goes up. I've also noticed, though, once you get to the point of playing Vintage, you do not have too many cares left to give. You are just playing Magic for the sheer fun of it. And I like being able to do complicated things. I like being able to play on a higher power level. So that's part of why I play Modern. I also like that, for the most part, those decks are not going to change. They're going to be using, the same cards, the same list. Maybe people have like cutesy fun cards they like to stick in and be like, well, everybody else likes to run this one card, but I'm going to do this differently. So there is some place to do some little change ups, do different things that other people aren't doing. But for the most part, it's kind of established, and you're like, okay, I'm playing versus Grixis Control or Grixis Delver. They're going to run these certain cards. This is how I beat this deck. And a lot of Modern, at least to me, over Standard, is you're knowing how your opponent's deck works so that you can beat them. So it's not just about knowing your deck. You need to know your opponent's deck. And I think that that's really interesting. And so that's why when I get faced with wacky brews sometimes in Modern, I'm like, why are you doing this? I want to play an established deck because I know I can beat the established deck. I know I can have an appropriate sideboard for an established deck. For some of these brews, it's like, what do I do here? I don't know. And so I like kind of having that linear mindset in Modern, and it is my favorite format to play. I also like Limited, and I play EDH from time to time. I want to get back into Standard, so we'll see how that goes. Perhaps what we brew up today will definitely be a thing I would want to try out. So I'm optimistic about other formats, but Modern is probably where I'm always going to come home to roost.
So what would your definition of a fair game of Magic, like what kind of interactions do you like or think, where's the sweet spot for you, or where do you think it gets unfair or not fun?
Well, the deck I'm playing right now in Modern is considered to be not a fair deck. Right now I'm playing Titan Shift, which uses Valakut the Molten Pinnacle to basically do damage to your opponent, do damage to their creatures, and ultimately you cast a card called Scape Shift. You get to sack all your lands, and then you find that many lands. They all enter at the same time. And so if you have Valakut and you have 6 other mountains, they'll all trigger, and it'll be 18 damage to your opponent if you so choose, or you can have some triggers go toward kill their creatures. But usually by that point, you just want to do it straight to the face and be done, and GG. So I didn't always used to play decks like that, but there's something fun about not playing fair. There's something interesting about not interacting with your opponent, but I definitely do like having interaction. So it depends on what I'm really going for when I'm playing. When I used to play Mono Bluetron, that deck is somewhat interactive in that it has counter spells, but the ultimate goal is to lock your opponent out of the game. So I like to play fair Magic. I do. I probably play more fair Magic when I'm playing Standard or other formats. I like to know that I'm not the only person having fun. I would prefer if the game is one and such that there is no clear person that it has the upper hand, that it's a constant back and forth. I mean, I even think about even when I'm watching soccer, it's like, I want this game to be back and forth. I don't want, to have just one team dominating the other. I want this to be interesting. I want to feel like both parties are fighting for it. And so if I get into like a counter war with someone, I'm like, okay, we're arguing over this spell, or maybe they have a bunch of creatures on deck. I need a board wipe to get back in the game. Just having a little bit of back and forth, I think, makes the game interesting for the person you're playing against and still makes it interesting for you. In Modern, some people play Agorio's Vengeance deck, where they're trying to get on deck with Grizzlebrand and just try to kill you by like the second or third turn. And for some people, they barely got to play a spell. Maybe they played a land. One time when I was still on Bluetron, I think I had a tower out and a expedition map, and the person killed me the subsequent turn. So I really didn't get to do anything. So not really fun for me. But I can see where some people like to play fair decks, some people don't. So when you're going through like the Modern format, especially, you have decks that are considered to be more fair or less fair. And I can roll with either one, but I feel better when I know my opponent had fun too, because I've definitely had the feel bads on the other side.
Yeah, our last deck that we worked on made it so we could get a 10-11 first strike creature on turn 3. Mm-hmm. And in Standard, that felt pretty unfair. So things can happen. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, you're not supposed to be able to do that. Like, that's not how the game is designed. But I don't know. We played 6 rounds in testing, and it happened frequently. It wasn't something that didn't happen. And of course, we were trying to push a new mechanic, which is sort of cheating creatures into play anyway, as far as we could. So, that was sort of the goal. But I'm really interested to see, how we really can get you excited about playing a Standard deck. That's really what I want to do, and figure out if we can zero in on, okay, so what would be the deck that would make you want to, sleeve it up and take it to a tournament. So I think we can do it, because I'm hearing you say things like, I like to play back and forth. I like to have the, sort of the back and forth game, and use your skill, because you were obviously very skilled at the game, to win games, as opposed to sitting there and getting locked out or doing that. So if you had to pick a deck archetype, or a couple deck archetypes that you prefer to play, i.e. aggro to control, where do you find yourself picking up that deck and going and having the most fun?
Let's see. Well, when I originally came back to the game, I was mostly centered on just playing a lot of creatures and just trying to get there. And I started realizing that I had some issues with combat math and stuff like that. And I was like, I want to do something different. So then I started gravitating more toward control decks. So I got more experience with control, and for a long time, that was mostly what I preferred to do. And then I kind of broke out of that once I started playing Titan Shift in Modern, because that is a combo deck. And so I've kind of flitted between those three archetypes. I also like tempo decks as well, so it just kind of depends on what I'm feeling at the moment, because I could be really aggressive if I wanted to. I built Burn and had just a wonderful time with it and be like, oh my god, I win, it's like turn 5 or something. So I can run the gamut. I haven't played a good control deck in a long time, though. That's one of the things I feel that Standard is currently lacking, is a really good control deck. Now, admittedly, we can't go back to Return to Ravnica block and just being, like, Sphinx's Revelation for like 10 or something. That's just not going to happen. But I still think that there is a place for control in this current Standard, and I would like to see it if possible. I know that there had been some talk about how control wasn't going to be very good, and people were going to try to do this Saheeli combo thing, the whole copycat thing, and I was like, that's gonna fail miserably. And control, it seems like it still is weak, but I think it has the potential. So if I could get a good control deck, that would be awesome.
Okay. I think we can definitely do that. I think that sounds like a really good challenge. In particular, because I think you were correct in that Standard, this current Standard at Aether Revolt isn't really set up to enable control to have the upper hand, especially when you've got a lot of very quick, very cheap, as far as converted mana cost, threats that land on the board early that you just have to deal with. And going card for card, like control tends to do in a lot of cases, is difficult, because you can spend a card to counter the spell, but you're like, counter spells typically cost 3 mana for the good ones, and so you're like, yeah, okay, so I just countered your 1-drop, even though you knew it was going to just crew their giant vehicle and smash you if you didn't. So the card advantage side of control is tricky right now, with the counter spells and the control cards costing a lot more and being a lot slower than the little threats that can go wide and come at you or do lots of different things. So, Graham, do you have any feelings on that?
I'm totally down with that. I think you're absolutely correct in all those points. I think that there are definitely some directions that we can go to build a playable Standard control deck. I see a lot of low toughness creatures in the top 8 decks. Let's just put it that way. Looking at the top 8, I don't see a single creature with a toughness greater than 2. There's Depala. We got one creature with a toughness greater than 2. So I think it's definitely viable. I think board wipes might be a good way to control your opponent, in addition to the typical counter spells, because I agree that counter spells themselves are very expensive and not super valuable in terms of like creature removal or preventing board states, as much as shutting down bombs and things of that like.
Right. So it's so basically we should just go ahead and start talking a little bit about where the metagame for Standard is right now, because maybe that will help us pick a good direction that we feel like is well positioned in the metagame. And right now, from we have the results in from Pro Tour Aether Revolt in Dublin, and it's not what I expected, to be perfectly sincere. I was expecting a lot more green and black. I was expecting a lot more winding constrictors and walking ballistas. And what we're seeing is just, I think, decks 1 through 6 were various flavors of Mardu vehicles with scrap heap scroungers and all kinds of stuff. So
6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, so a lot of them were up there. Kriz, did you get a chance to look at any of the results from the Pro Tour?
Yes, I did. It seemed like, and someone had put out an article on Channel Fireball very recently, where they talked about how we have playable aggro decks, we have playable mid-range and combo. We only kind of have an okay control deck that we can probably pilot right now. It seemed like Mardu Vehicles just kind of went away with the whole thing, which I think surprised some people, because Mardu Vehicles hadn't been performing quite as well recently. It had been a lot of black-green. People are playing copycat like no tomorrow. But I think one thing that was very telling from the Pro Tour was that the Saheeli decks just have a very hard time trying to assemble and effectively go off with their combo. And they also... it was also noticed that you really need to have a deck that's going to curve out correctly, because a lot of decks weren't doing that. Mardu Vehicles just does that. And having decks with red just consistently seems to perform well at the Pro Tour. So there were a couple fringe decks and other things like that. I was pleased that Paradoxical Outcome didn't do anything, because I get what people are trying to do with the deck, but I don't find it effective, I don't find it fun, and I don't find it to be consistent. And those are definitely 3 things that I would look for in a deck. There were some black-red zombie decks. Sultide Delirium Control has been a deck that's been speculated to maybe put Mardu Vehicles on notice. So I guess we'll have to see what happens as time passes on from the Pro Tour. But it seemed like Mardu Vehicles is going to be the deck to beat in coming weeks if people do stand by the Pro Tour and tailor their decks to mirror that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that basically the response cards to threats are slow and cost a lot, except for in black, right? You've got Fatal Push and you've got Unlicensed Disintegration, which are just really good at that. And so, yeah, maybe since, usually it's sort of supposed to be a rock, paper, scissors kind of deal, and these decks are extremely aggressive. And so maybe a well-balanced control could do it. Like, for example, a card that just jumps right to my brain as something that would be good against this deck is Kozilek's Return, which deals 2 damage to every creature. And I just feel like if you resolve a Kozilek's Return before they can crew, or at an inopportune time, then you could potentially make it so that their vehicles sit doing nothing on the battlefield. And so I feel like there's some options there.
Well, not only that, but something like Radiant Flames in a similar vein for removing all of your opponent's pilots. Obviously, it's going to be on your turn as a sorcery. But if you have something like an Authority of the Consuls or a Thalia in play to begin with, if they never have an opportunity to untap their creatures in a manner that allows them to crew their vehicles, they can never use them.
Which is very true.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wonder, though, and I wonder if part of the problem with the true control shells right now is that you can control for a little while and then you just start getting overwhelmed. And a lot of control decks rely on essentially spending turns controlling the board to get enough mana for their big end game threat, or their Torrential Gearhulk, or whatever their big payoff spell is. And maybe what the problem is that the traditional control idea of going all the way in that direction, it just isn't sustainable. You basically, I wonder how many, if you were going to try that and you're down and trying a tournament, how many people are dying with 5 mana on the board and the Torrential Gearhulk in their hand, kind of thing. Because even though you can kill a creature here or bounce a creature or counter a spell here, your opponent's just playing 2 or 3 big real threats and drawing cards and just going around you too much.
Right, exactly. And people especially are probably going to be more up on Heart of Kiran now that it performs so well at the Pro Tour. I mean, it's a 4/4 for 2, and it works with your Planeswalker, so Gideon is still an amazing Planeswalker. So it's hard to beat a deck that curves out effectively with, two drops mostly, and couple... 3 drops, maybe. And then, of course, you got Gideon, but not really hard to get out. So trying to navigate around that is, I think, a little difficult. Even with Aethersphere Harvester, I mean, it's a 3/5 for 3 and still good. You definitely need something that's going to deal with these creatures effectively.
Yeah, I think that Aethersphere Harvester is a great answer to Heart of Kiran, but it doesn't answer the Gideon on the ground that's also smashing you with the pair of it. So it's really tricky. So if there was a direction to sort of answer this, I'm thinking, and tell me what you think, maybe something that's sort of a combination between a true control deck and more of a sort of a tempo advantage deck might be the spot. You don't want to wait too long. and maybe you're just kind of like eking out those individual little advantages where you can, kind of thing. Would that be a direction that you would be interested in pursuing?
Sure.
This is tricky. Basically, if like I don't think a true tempo deck is really probably where we want to go, but then with disallow and some of the new decent counter spells, maybe sort of like a counter spell advantage. Do we want to go in the sort of the blue-red direction so that we can use cards like Radiant Flames and Kozilek's Return, and maybe something like Fevered Visions would seem to work with this idea? Or do we want...
Yeah, if we ran a bunch of bounce spells with Fevered Vision, I feel like those work nicely in conjunction with each other. They kind of feed each other.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get it, we'll definitely, I think we should sort of use that as our base and sort of build off of that direction in a little bit. But maybe I wanted to touch a little bit more on were there any other surprises or things from the Pro Tour that you weren't expecting, that you were seeing? Like, I know that the vehicles thing was kind of a surprise, but it's it's here. They took out Smuggler's Copter and just replaced it pretty much straight up with Hardakirim. I was surprised. I mean, it seems like you called it, Chris, but I was surprised that the copycat combo didn't do a little bit better. I was expecting it to be, 2-card combo where it's so easy to find your card. Seems like you should just be able to play the numbers and do pretty well on that one. But
yeah, I think that maybe there was so much hype around it and people are like, oh, it's going to be the next Splinter Twin and this whole thing, that I think the pros might have been split on it to be like, okay, yes, I can see where this could be very powerful, but there's definitely going to be people that are instantly going to be gunning for this type of thing, and how quickly and effectively can you put the combo together. And so I wouldn't be surprised if going forward Copycat didn't do very well going on. I guess it will remain to be seen, like at SCG events and other stuff like that. I do think, though, that Copycat could definitely maybe be more effective if we give it like another set or two. Like maybe Amonkhet will give something to have more protection, so that you're protecting Saheeli, that you're being able to protect the cat better, because it seems like once you've landed at least one part of the combo, someone has an easy way to deal with it. And maybe we'll get some more powerful cards in Amonkhet that will make it better. Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be just one of those things where it's the flavor of the week, and then the Pro Tour happens and people are like, oh, maybe this just wasn't as good as we thought it was. So I think it will remain to be seen. I'll give it till April or May and see where it is then.
But that said, there's still going to be people who are going to be playing a lot of these decks, and so I feel like today when we're brewing, we should make sure we don't forget about that and make sure we're at least including a couple ways to disrupt the combo if possible, because it would be really annoying to be expecting all these vehicles and Winding Constrictors and Verdurous Gearhulks and then just assume the combo is going to go away, and then it doesn't fast enough, and when we take the deck to F&M, it just like, oh, okay, infinite, cool, done, yeah, great. Yeah, I thought you were leaving. You're not leaving?
I thought you were leaving.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, Saheeli's still here, guys. Still here. It's just awkward for everybody. So yeah, okay. Let's go ahead and move into our brew for this week. And just a little recap or a little explanation on why we do this and what the point is and what we're trying to do versus not trying to do. We were absolutely not trying to one-shot a Pro Tour ready deck list by committee on a podcast. Is not the goal. We're not going to be able to do that. We want to develop some ideas and put together a coherent deck that is a valuable, what we believe is a viable idea, but will require tuning rounds and testing rounds and various things that we hope you, our listener community, will help participate and be part of the team with us on, so that we can get feedback from you guys on, hey, you idiots, you didn't see this card and it was staring you in the face the whole time, but nobody talked about it. Great, put that in and let us know how it goes with that card. We want to hear all about those things, and we're not going to be able to catch everything. But the idea is that as we talk about these interactions, we talk about these cards, we try to build for the metagame that we were talking about. We're hoping to just inspire you to brew along with us or come up with your own ideas, and then please let us know on Twitter or on our Tapped Out how you did and how you felt about it. So that's the direction we're going. And so I think right now we've kind of got a blue-red control idea is where we're starting. So as the control expert, Chris, can we just like sketch out, and can you help us sketch out an outline of typically what kind of balance you're looking for, like how many creatures that you can feel would contribute versus how many spells you're just going to want in your hand? Do you just have like a starting place where you can adjust from, but just some place to start out at?
Well, in a lot of control decks, you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of land for sure. I would say 25 to 27 lands is probably what you're going to want. You're going to want to make sure you have a good spell suite and creatures. Probably, it doesn't have to be a lot of creatures. You could have, your big finisher, your big bombs. You could have creatures that enable you to get other things, whether or not they have like an activated ability, which is good, or if they produce mana and other things, that's good as well. But you definitely want to make sure that you have counters, and that if you are able to get access to removal, you definitely want to do that as well.
Okay. So in this idea, if we're sort of mixing in the middle of the idea of, okay, we're going to control them with counter magic for the most part and sweepers, we need to make sure that any creatures that we bring on will hopefully survive our sweepers, right? So I don't know. I guess, is that a good place to start, or should we talk about like which spells we feel like are just locks for this idea before we move on?
Probably focus on spells, and then most likely a finisher of some kind, because you want to be like, okay, my ultimate goal is to deny them this, and then we want to end with this. If we're looking specifically at Mardu vehicles, we definitely want something, and unfortunately there aren't a lot of, at least in my opinion, there aren't a lot of good anti-artifact spells, and that's kind of a problem. Like, once they're on the board, at least. So you definitely want to have access to board wipes and other things, and the two colors that are going to do that are going to be black and white. So...
But if we're running red, what do we have in red that is good for anti-artifact? Traditionally, red has some kind of shatter effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're just high cost, and some of them aren't good. That's the problem.
Yeah, red right now is not great for anti-artifact. I mean, maybe we ought to consider Jeskai just because of its anti-artifact ability, not to mention the aforementioned Authority of the Consuls /
Thalia, Heretic Healer.
Thank you, Thalia.
Cathar.
Yeah, in terms of shutting down creatures being able to crew their vehicles.
I definitely see that as more of a tempo play, right? Because if their creatures are coming into the battlefield tapped, you're going to need to be able to take advantage of that and attack in while they're tapped and get that damage in before they untap. And to me, the only other reason for that is to block the copycat combo. But if we're sitting back, I don't feel like it would do as much, because the 1 life per creature off of Authority of the Consuls isn't going to be worth the card, probably.
So, looking at this, and looking at what our opponents' decks are going to be looking like, at least in terms of the gauntlet that we test against, and looking at our options, I'm currently leaning more towards a more tempo type of deck, for just the reasons we talked about, the lack of anti-artifact cards in blue and red, and the fact that it would be very effective against both the Copycat and the Mardu vehicles decks, which are two of the biggest threats.
That's true. What do you think, Chris? Would you be okay playing a tempo deck instead of a true control deck if we built you one?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I find this I think this is great, actually, because it's a real challenge, because balancing this properly so that you don't end up with a handful of spells or a handful of small creatures that don't do very much, is kind of a big thing. So, okay, well, in that case, let's sort of make the decision that we want to be mostly a proactive deck instead. That said, when we were talking about the balance between proactive and reactive, I don't think we have to turn the knob all the way to 11 that way, because I still think running ceremonious rejections is probably a good idea, and that is definitely a reactive card.
Yeah, card's so good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just good, especially right now. Like, there's never been a time when it's better than it is right now.
Absolutely. And I think that there are a couple of obvious choices in terms of damage to get across, and a couple of potential forks or either ors for how we're going to get our damage. I know that in previous red blue decks that are spell based that I have run, I am a massive fan of Storm Chaser Mage, which is a 1/3 flying haste prowess creature for blue-red.
Yeah, that card's amazing. Such a good card. I'm really sad that not a lot of people have been playing with it, because it's just baller.
Yeah,
especially with Thing in the Ice, because you get 3 benefits. Is that really it could be a 3-for-1 with a spell, right? Bounce a creature, get a prowess trigger, and take a counter off a Thing in the Ice. Seems good to me.
One thing to think about, though, is I'm not sure that in a tempo deck, Thing in the Ice is really the way we want to go.
Can you explain why? Because bouncing all of your opponent's creatures seems pretty good tempo play to me.
Sure does. However, I would rather... Well, I guess not necessarily rather. I'd like to put together a little bit more of the deck, and unless we really want it to be a build-around... but I don't think that I'm looking for a big bomb in a tempo deck. I really just kind of want to slowly wear my opponent down a couple turns at a time. A couple damage at a time. Thing in the Ice seems like a bomb to me. I'd rather try to find a way to gain card advantage and keep hitting my opponent for 3 or 4 damage per turn with prowess triggers. Or something else.
Sure.
Another card that I'm really fond of in a deck like this would be something like Mercurial Geist, which can just get nasty fast. Mercurial Geist is a 1/3 flyer for 2 blue-red, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Mercurial Geist gets +3/+0 until end of turn, so it's kind of got like super prowess.
Yeah. So, okay, so if we're gonna be, yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm gonna add these guys to the list here.
In terms of other tempo-y control style cards, we have a lot of options in terms of bouncing our opponent's creatures or tapping them down if we want to go that route. I am leaning more toward the bounce mechanic just because it forces our opponents to recast them. Select for Inspection is a blue for return target tapped creature to its owner's hand, and scry 1, which is super great value. That's an instant. You also have Clutch of Currents, which is blue for return target creature to its owner's hand. It's a sorcery. But it does have Awaken 3 attached to it for 4 and a blue.
So Select for Inspection has an additional hurdle. The creature has to be tapped.
And it also misses Heart of Kirin.
It also misses Heart of Kirin?
Heart of Kirin does not tap.
Mm-hmm. Has vigilance.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Right, yeah. And so that one seems more reactionary. Like, okay, they're going to tap to attack, and then before damage or whatever, you just return it to their hands. That seems more of a reactionary version. So I think I'm more into Clutch of Currents, even though you don't get the scry.
Well, as an actual third option, it's not a 1-drop, but there is a 2-drop bounce spell called Disperse. And it says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And it's not conditional otherwise, which is nice because that you can use to bounce a Heart of Kirin or an Aether Sphere Harvester or something else that's on the battlefield that is making your life difficult. That even could be something like a Aetherworks Marvel.
And Disperse is just good. Like, it's an amazing card.
Yeah, just a 1 to blue.
So Clutch of Currents and Disperse seems pretty good, and we'll get those creatures in there. Do we need a third option for bounce? Maybe we throw in, is there one that bounces more than 1 permanent, or that costs 3 or 4?
Well, there is Barrel's Expertise, which is 3 blue, which is a little on the expensive side. In addition, it is a sorcery, but it does return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hand. Additionally, you may cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So it's pretty amazing all around, especially when you take into consideration Mercurial Geist, if you played that the previous turn, and Storm Chaser Mage, however many of those you have in play.
What is toughness and power on Geist again?
It's a 1/3.
1/3. Okay. So the advantages so far to Storm Chaser Mage and to Mercurial Geist is doesn't die to shock, which sounds good to me. And Mardu Vehicles doesn't run Harness Lightning that I know of. So that's good.
Yeah, I think I saw one version of it did, but that was not one of the top 4 decks.
And, Unlicensed Disintegration does the 3 damage, which is bad, but if you have ways to get off prowess triggers, reactionary, that's not bad, or counter spells, then you're pretty good, because there are some good counters. Some people don't necessarily play all of them. Like, even if you're going to counter a creature spell, Horribly Awry is like an amazing counter spell, and it hits everything that Mardu Vehicles is going to run as a creature. Yep. Which is good.
It's effective until turn 5, like 100% effective until turn 5 on all Mardu Vehicles.
No, it's not, because it doesn't hit Heart of Kirin, and it doesn't hit Gideon.
Yeah, it's a creature spell. So you would definitely want to have Ceremonious Rejection for Heart of Kirin, but because they're also running Scrap Heap Scrounger, and they can bring that back from the graveyard. But if you're able to Horribly Awry it, it's exiled and they won't get it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the exile aspect of that card. Similarly, I'm also a big fan of Spell Shrivel for that reason. It's a little bit more expensive, but the exile aspect is very nice, as well as just the fairly insurmountable additional 4 cost.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, it's like when you're sideboarding, be like, okay, is this a more aggressive matchup? Then these are the counter spells I want to use. Is this a less aggressive matchup? Then I'm going to board into these spells instead. So, that's the nice thing, is you can kind of play with your slots, with your sideboard, and make sure that you have spells that cover both aspects.
So I feel like we have quite a few options now for our disruption spells, because we're gonna probably want to play higher numbers of them, especially since they're so cheap. Do we think we want to go in the Aether Sphere Harvester direction, or are we just going to go all in on the prowess and maybe put in another prowess creature or 2?
Well, another option for a prowess type creature that also can act as an engine is a card that I personally like, called Curious Homunculus, which is a 1/1 for 1 in blue, and you can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool to spend it only on instant or sorcery spells. But at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more instant and or sorcery spells in your graveyard, you transform it into a 3/4 prowess creature that also causes your instant and sorcery spells to cost 1 less, and that's called Voracious Reader.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Curious Homunculus.
Everybody always forgets about Curious Homunculus. He just wants to know how to kill you best.
Yeah, and actually sort of these flip cards are definitely a way to get value out of a low-cost creature, because another way that tempo decks can really gain value or card advantage against your opponents is they have to spend a really expensive spell to destroy your really cheap spell. And I feel like Curious Homunculus is something that they would have to answer pretty quickly, especially if you're using it to cast more spells instead of attacking. So
yeah, absolutely. I found through my own usage of it, it does become a target for removal, which is kind of a nice thing, because it allows your Storm Chaser mages to survive, and those are ultimately what end up really coming through for you.
Mm-hmm. Another card to consider in relation to removal or even just direct damage is a card that I really love. It's been kind of underrated because it didn't exist in the Kaladesh main set, but Flame Lash is a really good card. It's 3 colorless and a red, but at instant speed you get to deal 4 damage to target creature or player, and that definitely hits Heart of Kirin.
Oh yeah,
it surely does.
So,
Yeah.
that's a thing.
And especially, like, I feel like tempo decks really want cards like this because you kind of get so close. Like, they're at 3, and then they board wipe you or something. And you're like, and it's going to take me forever to build back up to that last little thing. So, because we're hopefully going to be just ticking them down, turn over turn. So I think this is a great idea.
And it doesn't hurt to be like Flame Lash you, redirect to Gideon. That's not bad either.
Yeah, I'm liking this. So we've added the homunculus, we've added Flame Lash. Okay.
I know that in previous prowess decks that I've played, there are 2 1-drop spells that were particularly effective or nice to have at least a couple of in the deck. And one of those was, and both of them are cantrips, thankfully, because everybody loves a cantrip. One of those is Expedite, which is a red for target creature gains haste until end of turn, draw a card, which pairs very nicely if you happen to have a Mercurial Geists in your hand at the beginning of turn 5, because that is 4 damage from, that's a 4/3 flyer coming at you on turn 5. Similarly, a card called Slip Through Space, which is a sorcery for a blue, makes target creature unblockable until end of turn. Draw a card. Everybody loves cantrips.
Yeah, and Slip Through Space is just like an awesome underrated card.
It's true. That's another finisher way to get some damage through if you've pumped up your Geist and they're like, okay, well, I'll just chump block it with my Thopter token, and you're like, nope, no, you won't.
Is there any thought to energy in relation to this deck? Question mark.
Yeah, we had thought about energy briefly in terms of the
Aether
Hub, and I think Colin was kind of on the right track with the Aether Sphere Harvester, which I like for another reason, because it can be piloted by any creature that we have discussed today. So it can be piloted by the Homunculus, it can be piloted by the Storm Chaser Mage, it can be piloted by the Geists, and that just makes them more valuable because it turns their 1 power into 3 and their 1 to 3 toughness into 5, which is never a bad thing. Plus, it creates energy. We don't even need to use it for its energy component if we don't, or for its lifelink component if we don't need to. If we would rather have that energy to power an Aether Hub.
Well, what energy cards do you have in mind, Chris?
If we were trying to have things that would put our opponent at a disadvantage, Aether Meltdown is a good card that has flash. It can enchant the creature or vehicle, and it gives it -4/-0, which isn't a bad thing. It's like, okay, cool, you have this thing. Now it does like squat. Enjoy.
Yeah, not only can it not do damage, but it no longer has power to crew vehicles. I really like that pick. Sadly, it's not an instant or sorcery. That's my primary beef with it, so it doesn't activate prowess. But it is pretty freaking great otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it doesn't, because prowess has to trigger off of instant or sorcery, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But if the energy that you get from it makes up for the lack of the prowess trigger somehow, if we have a good payoff or something like the Aether Sphere Harvester, then it's still doing more than one thing when you cast it. Even if it's not prowessing all of your creatures. Because maybe you're tapping your prowess creature to crew the Harvester anyway.
Yeah, that's true. So I was looking at that, and that's why I was wondering, well, it's better, well, I shouldn't say it's better, but it would be nice if you did use the energy component, because otherwise you could just focus on other spells in place of it, because I like cards that are going to give me more than one thing, and then I'm going to use all of those things effectively.
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe the energy thing is we're just getting energy for Aether Sphere Harvester, and that's how we're getting our slight edge.
I think the Aether Sphere Harvester is definitely something we should consider, and that would allow us to run 1 or 2 Aether Hubs. So just if we need that random color very early game, we can have it.
So I think maybe like if Mercurial Geist and Aether Sphere Harvester are our top end ones, right? We've got a finisher. We've got the Harvester that just grinds and grinds and grinds, and you keep tapping your 1-drops to get in with those ones, and then you play the Geist, and then you get 2 prowess triggers, and a slip through space, and you win the game that way. That seems pretty feasible to me, with all the bounce spells and various things that go. And so it seems like we've got quite a crew for our harvester right now with the creatures we've chosen. For example, Curious Homunculus, although we might be tapping that for mana, Storm Chaser Mage, and all seem like good crews for the harvester. So maybe we should go in the harvester direction. And then we've got Glimmer of Genius on the top for adding a couple extra energy at 4 mana. That seems feasible to me, actually, with Aethersphere Harvester.
Yep, I think Aethersphere Harvester is a fine choice.
We don't really have a lot of card draw in this deck yet, I don't think. I think that's probably our missing component now.
Well, we just talked about Glimmer of Genius.
Okay. But yeah,
Glimmer will get us there.
The other option is it's not like strictly card draw, but we have 2 options. They're both sorceries. One's 2 in a red, one's 2 in a blue. The blue one is called Pieces of the Puzzle, and it says reveal the top 5 cards of your library and put up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. The other one is called Shreds of Sanity, which is 2 in a red, and it says return up to 1 target instant card from 1 target instant card and up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card. Exile Shreds of Sanity. So both of them potentially put 2 instants and or sorceries into your hand for 2 in a colored mana. Shreds of Sanity requires an additional discard, but it's also more targeted.
But it's also not good early, right? Because you might not have the spells in there that you want, and it might say, well, I need everything, so I'm sacrificing. Yeah, I'm not really into Shreds of Sanity, especially because it's a sorcery. I was actually thinking of what you guys thought about Fevered Visions as an idea.
Oh,
because if we're bouncing stuff to people's hands, we're gonna be hopefully keeping them above 4 cards in their hands pretty much every turn, and so the thing basically it's repeatable card draw, which I like, and it's symmetrical, which isn't always great. But if we have all these bounce and counter threats, then they'll probably just be staring at their hand, going, okay, what would I like to get countered first, and then they play something, and then you bounce that one. So I mean that's tricky. So I don't know, Chris, having more experience with this type of deck, do you feel like that's a feasible direction, or are we just handing them weapons by giving them extra cards every turn that we're going to regret?
It depends on... I guess it depends on when we're putting the cards back into their hand and how many spells we have to do that effectively, so that they end up in a situation where it's like, okay, they have cards in their hand, we're doing damage to them. Because the problem with like Mardu vehicles is they're so fast, and I just wonder at what point they're going to have, because it has to be 4 more cards. I'm just trying to see how often that would happen. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad idea by any means. I'm just trying to think like,
that's exactly what we want to do. We want to think about that for sure.
If we have enough, bounce spells or anything to make it worth it, or if there's, because I don't think there's anything that makes them
right now we're only running 2 bounce spells that would actually affect that: Clutch of Currents and Disperse. I am still a proponent of Barrel's Expertise, which is a little bit on the higher end, but does potentially put 3 cards in your opponent's hand. And I could also be interested in adding another bounce spell to our arsenal, should that be the direction we wanted to go, preferably at instant speed. So something like Just the Wind, or Select for Inspection would be fine. Aether Trade Winds is a little bit more of a downside.
Yeah, I think that Brawl's Expertise is perfectly feasible. It's just really expensive, so it would we just have to really think about the balance of cards as far as how many spells versus how many creatures we're running, and it just would make the numbers a little trickier. because it's so expensive, and it also requires another card in your hand to cast to make it really worth it.
Are we thinking like 4 Storm Chasers? Are we thinking 4 Mercurial Geist? How many do you think of each one?
Totally. So I think that the 4 mana spells, and this is where my typically building lower to the ground decks goes in. Like, okay, we'll run 2 Mercurial Geists and 2 Glimmer of Genius, and then that's like our top of the thing. But running in a control deck, running 25 lands, can we get away with more? Should we get away with more? I'm not sure exactly. Because the Harvester costs 3, so that's a bigger investment out of the gate.
Well, I feel like the Storm Chaser Mage is an easy 4 of. And I would be willing to entertain arguments against, however, my rebuttal will be an unchanging "you are wrong."
Okay, well, I see. Well, against that, I will just go ahead and put 4 on the list and save us all like 10 minutes. It'll be great.
Okay, so basically we're looking at flyers is what I'm hearing. So do we necessarily, because Copter's out, so we're looking at what? Heart of Kieran, because that flies 4/4. So I just wanted to see if we still need the slip through space, but we definitely don't want them to block our flyers if they have those things. So that's probably something to definitely hang on to.
But I see slip through space also as a finisher, so I don't think that's a 4 of on that one.
Right. True that. I'm just trying to think of, because then you also have tricks, and you can be like, oh, cool, you're gonna block my thing. Boom, here, before damage, do this, blah blah. Let's see. Okay, so then that's all right. So for those, yeah, I think that having 8 creatures is not a bad thing. I think around there is probably where we want to be. It's just a matter of what creatures you specifically want to go all in on. Because I just remember when they put out Mercurial Geist, that card reminded me a lot of We Dragon Nuts from back in the Dizzy. And so you kind of built your deck around the Dragon Nuts and be like, okay, we're going to have all these instants and sorceries. This is going to pump our dudes. This is what we want to do. So that's the only reason why I questioned the Homunculus, just trying to see where we were at, to be like, okay, how often are we actually going to be tapping the Homunculus for mana, or do we really want it for its other abilities, or is it better just to go all in and be like, our creatures are going to be Geist and Storm Chaser Mage, those are our 8, and kind of tailor the spells around those, because then you have like a centerpiece for your deck and you're building it around this particular aspect.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I could definitely be into 4 Mercurial Geists, 4 Storm Chaser Mages. I would be willing to cut the Homunculi.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. So if you think 8 creatures is good for this, I'm in. It just feels like it feels low, Chris, but I don't play control. That's why it feels low.
Yeah. I mean, and we can tweak it too, because like once we're like, okay, this is our starting base, these are the creatures we want to use, these are the spells that are going to make our creatures more effective, this is what we're trying to deny people, and then kind of tweak it from there. Believe me, I have scraps of paper all over my house of decks I've like written up and been like, how many times have I revised this? Like 6. So
totally. So if we're running, I think your instinct is correct. I think we should go 4 Mercurial Geist, 4 Storm Chaser Mages. So with this plan, how many Harvesters does the deck want?
Let's see. Okay, let me look at Harvester again. So crew 1, we're fine there.
Well, more importantly, we should, or not necessarily more importantly, but alternatively, we should start talking about numbers for our reactive and proactive spells that are going to power the Mercurial Geist and the Storm Chaser Mages.
Well, bouncing is kind of the main way we're getting our creatures through, right? Because
yeah, absolutely,
we have to be doing enough damage. Well, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because at that point, I'm assuming you would want to be bouncing any creatures that they can use to crew, correct? Okay. And the only reason I asked that was just because I was looking to see, as the majority of our bounce spells are sorcery speed. That's why I was looking to see.
Right, for bounce spells, I've also got, at instant speed, there's Aether Trade Winds, which returns something you control and something your opponent controls. There is Brutal Expulsion. It's a little expensive, but it's multi-purposed. Disperse.
It's like, darn it, Wizards, why can't you give us things? Oh, hello.
Just the Wind is also an option. 1 and a blue for return target creature to its owner's hand with a madness cost of 1. What'd you find there?
Unsubstantiate.
Yes, unsubstantiate.
Because that's definitely a thing that will let us do it at instant speed.
Mm-hmm. And it also is a semi-counter spell if we just need to hold a bomb at bay.
So unsubstantiate is kind of like part of... It's kind of like part of disallow meets Clutch of Currents, because you can return a spell that's on the stack but hasn't resolved, or you can return a creature that's in play. So that's interesting. Okay.
Well, and for that matter, you can return a creature that's on the stack too.
That's true.
I think unsubstantiate is a 4 of as well. I like that card a lot. I completely forgot about it.
I've been getting wrecked with it in Frontier.
So, and here's my problem is that I love all these cards, but bless him, Daniel hated these cards.
I know. Daniel is like, we're playing unsubstantiate? That just loses you a card. Yeah, but no, I think in this deck, this is what it's for. I've been trying to represent Daniel with my doubting. Have I not been doubting enough? I've been trying to be
You've been very gracious.
I've been trying to be the doubter this time since Daniel's not here, because that's important.
So he's kind of like the Scully of the show.
Daniel is the spiky player that keeps us from johnning ourselves off all the cliffs.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
So we have 3 Johnnies here today, so I have to well, I guess Graham's kind of Timmy too, but
yeah, I'm not really a Timmy. I'm probably more of a Johnny at this point. Probably when I was first playing Magic, and I definitely fell back into the trap when I first got back into Magic. I was definitely a Timmy, but it only took me a couple months to figure out that Johnny's way more fun.
Totally.
For all of the reasons that we talked about earlier in the episode.
Okay. So right now, I went ahead and added some lands so that we can start getting our numbers better.
Because that puts us at, 54 cards so far?
So it depends on, like, right now, we're actually running more lands than I normally would for a CMC of, 2.2, but we also have to adjust numbers.
Right. And then looking at our spells, we definitely want more of X, Y, and Z or whatever, so...
Right, yeah. We need to be running more Disperse. We should probably bump up our Horribly Arise to 2, Flame Lash to 2, Glimmer of Genius to 2.
Well, now we're way over. Way over.
Yeah, well, that's why we need to bump it up so we can start making cuts.
Yep.
Okay, so Glimmer of Genius goes to 2.
So I think Aether Meltdown needs to be cut because we're not doing the energy thing.
Okay.
Well, I mean, are we? I don't think so. I think we kind of decided against the energy thing.
So
it doesn't trigger
it because for Harvester.
Yeah, it doesn't trigger. Yeah, I'm less interested in Harvester's ability to gain me life than I am in its ability to block Heart of Kirin.
I think that maybe Aether Meltdown goes in the sideboard in case you run into the big vehicles.
Right. The other thing that I'm looking at right now is Slip Through Space as a potential card that we don't need. If we're going to be bouncing so many of our opponent's cards, we may not need to be unblockable in the air because we can just bounce their only blocking flyer.
Well, I think that's a trap. So I am going to Daniel this one because basically we're not going to be able to bounce, reliably bounce more creatures than they're reliably going to be able to draw and play. And if we only bounce the creatures that get in the way of our flying prowess creatures or our Aethersphere Harvester, then we're going to be ignoring the big vehicles and baddies on the ground. They're just going to kill us before we have a chance to gradually get them. So get them down in their life. So we're going to have to basically be bouncing their biggest threat, whether it's in the air or on the ground. And so I think that there are going to be many cases where they're going to have a mind rack demon up, but we have to bounce their gear hulk or their something else down there that is going to be killing us this turn, and we need to get past the mind rack demon to get in for the kill. So I think that slip through space is something we don't need a lot of because it is kind of a finishing, but we need to draw it at some point. Feel free to disagree, Graham, if you want.
Well, I don't think you're wrong, but if we are running 16 bounce spells, I think that our chances of being able to bounce more than one are pretty dang good.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Slip Through Space. I think it's a great card. I think that it may just not be necessary in this deck because of the fact that the deck is built around so many great bounce spells.
Right, but I don't know if we have room for 16 bounce spells. We'll see.
Oh yeah, Colin, I'm at 59 right now.
I've got 61. Let me...
Okay, there's 61.
And there's only one Harvester on the list.
Yeah, there's only one Horribly Awry on the list.
Let's see. I mean, you could probably take out the Horribly Awry if you wanted to, only because its creatures cost 4 or less. Let me see what else.
I feel like Horribly Awry and Disallow and Ceremonious Rejection are all going to be some combination of those 3 cards in whatever number you need them to be based on what your opponent is playing. Probably safe bet to main board a 2 Disallow and 2 Ceremonious Rejections in your first game and then adjust as needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Only because even if you look at, green-black aggro, they have some creatures that are going to be coming in, a 2 cost, but then they're Mind Rack Demons, they're Gear Hulks, they're obviously... Well, the Gear Hulks are higher cost, but the Mind Rack Demon's still within that. I guess it depends on what you're playing against. I mean, you could certainly side into it later if you wanted to. I mean, you could get rid of it for now and just kind of hang and see with what we have after that. Because I think that keeping Slip Through Space in there is still good because we want card draw. We want to be unblockable if possible. We want to bounce their stuff. Let's see. So we're at how many cards you said?
Right now we're at 62. So maybe we just
62.
want one Flame Lash.
Oh, why don't you drop the Aether Sphere to Harvester to 2 and then we'll be at 60? Because you must have upped something else. Well, I wasn't looking.
Yeah, so we're at 2.32, which is right between 24 and 25 lands.
I feel that Aether Sphere Harvester is probably a 2 of, considering it effectively occupies a creature space in the deck.
Does, but it's also how you come back from being behind a little bit if you can. And I want it earlier than you would draw a 2 of. Like, for example... a 2 of on the list, you're looking at only a 22% chance of getting it in your opening hand, and then you only have a 40% chance of getting it by turn 8. Like, it's just not...
Well, you dropped why did you drop Disperse to 3 and not Unsubstantiate, which can't bounce vehicles?
Oh, did I do that backwards? But basically, yeah, so basically I want a higher probability of drawing an Aether Sphere Harvester because I feel like it's important for how this deck is going to win the game, and so having a 2 of instead of 3 is a big difference in that.
I know we had talked about Kozilek's Return originally. Is that still something that interests you at all, or...
I guess it would just depend on what it was replacing, because... Otherwise, it doesn't interest me a whole lot.
It interests me against vehicle deck.
It could be a solid sideboard card.
I'm just trying.
Okay, well, if you're not into Kozilek's Return as using a sweeper strategy, then I still feel like we need to think about some more synergistic cards and make sure we haven't missed anything.
I'm just looking to see if there's any good enchantments or anything like that in red or blue that would be beneficial to us in any way.
Well, there are a couple enchantments that are pretty okay. Whether they're playable or not is debatable. There's Harness the Storm, which is 2 in a red, Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may cast target card with the same name as that spell from your graveyard. So you get 2-for-1s for things you've already cast.
But you have to pay. You have to pay for it again, right?
You do have to pay for it. But if it's a 1-drop, if it's a Clutch of Currents, or if it's even a Ceremonious Rejection, or an Unsubstantiate, hell, a Slip Through Space.
I don't know. I'm just not feeling that one. I feel like it would be not as efficient as we want, and if we're going to run a 3-mana enchantment, it should be more powerful than that.
What if we ran 3 Fevered Visions and we ran 2 Barrels Expertise?
I like that.
Oh God, right, Fevered Visions. I totally forgot. I thought we talked about that and I didn't put it on the list. Okay.
Fevered Visions is a card that definitely intrigues me, mostly because I've lost to it.
Yeah. This is going to change our curve, so we're going to have to add a land back in. So hold on a second. That brings us up to 2.5. So yeah, we have to be at 25 lands. So it's one more cut.
I'm still a fan of dropping 1 Aether Sphere Harvester, especially since we have a new source of damage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I need to fix the lands. Red-blue lands. Like, there's not a whole lot anymore in Standard.
No, because they got rid of...
Shivan Reef?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great card.
Okay, so the lands we have Ether Hubs, obviously. We're not going to have enough artifacts because our only artifacts are the 2 Aether Sphere Harvesters, so that we don't need the tower for this deck. And we're only in the 2 colors, so we're using the Ether Hub for energy, but we don't really need it for anything else.
We could always run Evolving Wilds, but it's not exactly ideal. If we're going to run Evolving Wilds, we might as well run one of the red-blue slow lands.
Mm-hmm. There's Wandering Fumarole, which is also an alternate win.
Oh God, Fumarole, so good.
Okay, so there we go. So we're good.
There we go. We have several alternate win conditions now. We've got creatures, we've got visions, we've got fumaroles, and we also have Awaken, kind of. We've got 4 Awaken cards in the deck.
Okay.
Bludgeoned by land.
So I'm pretty happy about this, where we're at here. Okay, 60 cards, 2.54, that's 25 lands. I think we landed in a good spot. So it's definitely control-y because, boy, we're bouncing everything. Ceremonious Rejection and Disallow for our hard counters. And then we've got some Clutch of Currents, Expertise, Unsubstantiate, and Disperse for our bouncing, and Flame Lash for a little extra spice for the late game, and Fevered Visions to draw cards and do a little extra damage. And then Aether Sphere Harvester, which is just a good card. So I'm pretty into it, actually. Kriz, is this something you think you'd like to play in Standard?
Yeah, it's definitely got cards that I enjoy in it. I like countering things. I like getting in for damage. Fevered Visions is a card that I've always been very fond of, so that's definitely a plus. Storm Chaser is Bay, so I'm down with it. And I've always wanted to play with Mercurial Geist. It was a card that I was really hyped for when Spooky Moon came out, so I definitely want to play with that card. So, yeah, and I think I have the majority of these cards. Yes.
Yeah, and the great thing is it's not even that expensive, other than the lands and the harvesters and apparently Disallow, which is now a $7 counterspell. It's pretty budget as well.
Yeah, that's not bad. Not at all.
Especially because even if you won't be bummed if you buy Disallow because you'll just use it so much.
Yeah. Well, and that's the same thing for the Aether Sphere Harvester. You can never have too many red-blue multi-lands, even if they are $8 a piece.
All right.
I have like 5.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm definitely liking the way our mana base is now, and like the sample hands that it's drawing better than it was before, for sure.
Yeah, I think that we've got a lot of options, and this deck should frustrate some people and work pretty well. So, Kriz, thank you so much for joining us and brewing a deck with us.
Of course, anytime.
Yeah, I hope that it is something that you want to try out. We will definitely test it, and we will run it through our gauntlet with the decks that we're running from the Pro Tour right now, and we will talk about the results next week on the podcast and what we've learned from it. And I look forward to playing it myself because I don't typically play decks like this. And I know, actually, maybe this is a good chance for you to talk a little bit about what you've got going on your blog, because this would be a deck that I would be afraid to play in a tournament, because I feel like there's so many choices, so many things, and this deck strikes me as something that would require a good pilot, and so that intrigues me and scares me. So I'm looking forward to testing it. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on your blog, and anything you want to plug or call out.
Okay. So the last couple posts that I made on my blog were a little bit different from another, but I think that when I find a good subject to talk about, I really definitely get into it. One of the things that I did in December was I issued a challenge to our listeners, and I called it my No Fear Challenge. And I encouraged people to find a deck that had stressed them out in the past, had them have any kind of self-doubt about themselves or about their abilities, or maybe a deck that just looked intimidating in some way. Throw it together, play it, and then I asked people to fill out kind of like a deck report for me. And I asked 5 questions about their experience with the deck. And once they submit it to me, then I'm going to choose my top 8 from however many people participate. And then I'm going to send out little prize packs to everyone, which are going to have some pretty cool stuff in it. The challenge just ended this past weekend, so I'm waiting for people to send in their submissions to me. I'm giving everyone until Sunday, maybe a little longer, depending on how long it takes people to kind of get all their stuff in, write everything up.
Okay, and that, just to be clear, that is Sunday the 12th of February?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Cool.
And I participated in the challenge myself, and I challenged myself to play Amulet Titan in Modern, because even when Summer Bloom was still legal, that deck was very intimidating to play. So I definitely learned some things, so I'll be updating my blog with that. Other recent things that I've done on the blog were talk about diversity that's going on, like in the multiverse within the Magic story, and different cards that have showed different characters that are either non-binary, or they're people of color, or they're trans, and just or different races, and just kind of showing how they're all different, and how I feel that it is very reflexive of our normal community, our world, just who we are as people. And then I also did a post recently about women in magic and my feelings on it, and just about inclusivity for all people. And so that definitely gained a lot of retweets, and a lot of people were talking about it. So I'm hoping that means it was well received. Of course, my thoughts are not everyone's, but offering a perspective on a continued subject that definitely has people feeling a lot of different feelings, I think was a good thing. But mostly I come up with whatever idea I want to talk about on the blog, usually things that have personally affected me in some way, and then try to offer a different perspective on it. So I already have 2 new posts that I'm considering right now. So I'm hoping that they will be good, or at least give people something to think about, because I definitely don't want to be constantly posting things to my blog that aren't interesting, or that were just kind of, I don't want to say like frivolous posts or anything, but I definitely want it to be about something important, and I definitely want it to be something that's worth reading, instead of just putting out content for the sake of putting out content.
Well, I really enjoy it, and I encourage all of our listeners to check it out. I will put a link to the blog into the show notes for this show. And I just actually want to applaud you, because you're right. Like, you're hitting that target. You're not just writing about frivolous things, and actually the things you're writing about require a lot of bravery. And so I want to say, good on you for doing that and putting yourself out there, and also on the girlfriend bracket as well. And I think that a lot of times content in the Magic community, ours included, can focus too much on the Magic and not on the community. And I think the community is very, very important, and is what keeps the game and the experience alive, and needs attention paid to it. And so thank you for taking that on and doing such a good job in doing that.
Thank you. I'm proud to do it. I try to be a good ambassador for the game and be welcoming to all people. And my favorite thing about playing Magic is definitely the community, meeting people at events, getting to know their story. And without that, I think my life would be a little less enriched.
Yeah. Well, I'm really, really thankful for you to coming on our show, and thank you for doing such a great job and helping us with our brew. And thanks, and hope to have you back at some point.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Tell your friends. Get excited.
Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, and you can even friend us on tappedout.net, where we post all of our deck lists from these live brews.
That's right. And let us know what you think in the comments.
And also, please find us on Twitter at Zirconia and or email us at moxzirconia@gmail.com to send us your list after you've tuned our live brew from today. We want to know how it worked for you.
We also want to know if it inspired you to get started on your own new deck idea or some crazy version of the deck we just brewed. So please tell us how it's going and share all the ways you are breaking standard with us. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you here next week.
Bye-bye.